I really like the pairing of your talks together, because I feel like it's kind of service design meta in that, you know, we're looking at the biggest, most holistic version of intention setting, and then going back down to how that really impacts the individual touch points. So maybe with your powers combined, we can save the world. So I have to kind of jump in with, I don't know, is it a silly question? So can you ever go anywhere, either of you, as designers, as people living with this mindset of noticing things, whether on an intention level or on a you know, micro level? Can anyone take you anywhere, or does it really bother you, you know, when you see that? I see you, yeah. same. What is that experience like?
I warn people about it ahead of time. Like, look, I'm sorry we're in the fast food line and we just want fries, but I'm going to break all this down, and I apologize in advance. I'm sorry. This is just going to happen.
Yeah. And yeah, I totally get it. And in fact, that was one of the reasons why I signed up to be a designer, right? So when I started out as an industrial designer, it was a lot because I had issues with a lot of the products there today, right? So car seats, for example. I mean, we bring kids into cars, and why would they not design a car seat to bring kids into cars? And so it's simple things like that. And from there to all the aspects that, you know, you've been discussing, I think it's very important. But until now, I think until a revolution like this happens, which gives us a little bit of agency to say, hey, look, we are running out of time, or this is important, and so on. It becomes a voice in the sea saying, hey, you know, change this, change that, you know, we need to be more ethical, and so on. That's what I'm glad is that the voice of design is getting stronger, and it's a slow process, but yeah. I like to be positive.
Yeah, I think we have to, unless we are going through the drive-through line, and it's a bizarre experience. I'm also curious if anyone in the audience can relate to this, because I feel like that drive and that kind of personal sense of urgency of noticing things, I feel like for me as a designer specifically, that's part of what drives me, because I notice things and I kind of, you know, you kind of have that desire to act on it. But I mean, so thinking about that, again, this is kind of a bigger question, but I feel like it's hard to think about it and not ask this question. How do we get people to care? Very practically speaking, how do we get people to care, again, about the macro and the micro? How do we get other people to be as annoyed by some of the things we notice as we are as designers, so that we can create that action?
Well, I think that I love the fact that designers are, like, let's say, perpetually unhappy with certain things, right? So that's always the case, and in some way, that's our professional prerogative, right? And I don't know if we want everybody to. I don't know if I wish that state for everybody. I'll tell you, I had a couple of friends who were movie makers, and you could not watch a movie with them, because they would sit down and say, oh my God, why was the dialogue here? Why didn't they cut the shot there? And so on. And we don't want people to live like that. But I think what is important is framing it so that everybody else cares, right? So we are beginning to understand, or at least I'm beginning to discover, that communication is so important. And how we communicate, how we bring something out and make people care. And it's kind of all encompassed to me in the word desirability, as what designers do. You know, when we say you want to make something desirable, if you put a boring argument in front of somebody, it's quite normal that people would react to it in a boring fashion. But if you make it interesting to them, make them connect with it, then the chances are they will act on
it. So this question is a little bit geared more towards Vijay. Have you ever been in a situation where you've realized that the culture being shaped has had negative consequences, but you don't have the power to change course? Or have you had the power to change course? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think so. So I'll give you an example of an organization I was with, and what happened, right? So I used to work with a company called TVS Motors, which was was at that time one of the biggest manufacturers of motorcycles in India. And until a certain time, a lot of the motorbikes that were being made were for males, right? And when the organization came up with something that was a scooter, there was a lot of back and forth on really would women at that time, there's between 1990s and 2000s, right? So would they want to use it? Would they drive a motorbike? Would they drive a scooter and buy it? But I think those conversations we were able to get through and get to the other side when we decided, okay, let's pilot a program where we have a way for them to try it out. We have a way for them to come in, use this as a way to get their license, and let's see what happens, right? And so we were able to, and the team was able to convince that. It was, of course, a collaborative effort. And fast forward a few years, that organization became to be known as the brand that brought mobility to the middle-class women of India. That particular line of scooters was one of the highest sold ones, where the marketing team even decided to do 99 plus colors of it, right? So, and this is something I just witnessed. I was part of it. Right? I was not the one who made this happen or anything, but I think that seeing that, I think there's a lot of power in being able to propose the right kind of things that can move the conversation forward. Right? So, yeah, I think there are ways we can do it. Of course, there are slips and times when we have to choose our battles sometimes, and we can't always win all of it. But yeah, I think being able to know that, sense that is a complex thing to live in the world today, right? So we need to make change happen. We need to choose our battles. We need to believe in the right things and let some things go sometimes when we cannot affect it. Right? Otherwise, it'll affect us. So.
Yeah, that's a really cool case study. I feel like as you said that, it's so clear that a product that ended up bringing so much value to such a large percentage of the demographic, it might have been one conversation away from not happening at all. I think that's such an indication of kind of the power of having these conversations. Ron, you had mentioned something that I chuckled at. You said that Europe is more successful with service design and doing more of it. And that's a frequent observation that I see as well. What do you think is holding the US back from taking greater advantage of service design? Is there a breakdown somewhere? What is it?
We don't have enough time for that conversation, but and we're recording
A happy
this, so
hour
I can't say what I really think. But I think, kind of what I touched on a little bit, in that I think that so much of this is just my personal opinion, but I think so much of the design culture here is driven by commerce and more specifically by tech, that I think it's hard to know where service design fits. I think that to me, and so I think that it's hard to I think that you could see a natural world where it would fit well in sort of somewhere between some public services and so forth, but we're good at slashing those. So I think it's hard to, I think for half the time you have to explain to people what it even is, right? And I think that, maybe instead of talking about all the structural problems for why it's not great, I think maybe there's a world where we as service designers, or sort of industry, or as a discipline, or whatever else, can be better at figuring out how to delineate our value in a way that helps people understand, oh, I need that, and I need that now, as opposed to what it may be now, where it's something a little bit more opaque to people, I think. But that's just my off the cuff ideas.
Mm-hmm. So going back to the intention design framework, Vijay, how long does it usually take, and how long should it take to kind of go through that process?
Yeah, so I think but it depends on the project and the earlier and how the more quickly you do it, the better. The more you drag on the conversation, it gets difficult. But usually to finish up, let's say the worksheets, where you have a discussion about, hey, what's the culture now? Like, what are the behaviors now? What are things we want to stop doing? What are things we want to celebrate? Those conversations sometimes spark questions of, do we know enough to answer these questions, right? So some of the intention behind the intention framework is to figure out the intention and know what we don't, and understand what we do not know as well. And so depending on how ready you are with those insights, how ready a team is to answer some of these questions, gets easy to fill up. The worksheet itself is probably a couple of hours of work, but the research that goes into that, or maybe the research that you would want to spark out of that, would be sometimes can take long time. And then I think the other worksheets of how we get to the point of, framing the knowledge challenges, or the challenges from the perspective of finance or wealth, that's relatively easier because we have lots of frameworks for that. We have a lot of people who are really good at that. And then when we get to collaborating, so I would say overall, if you have all your data ready, if you have everything ready, it's about a week or two of work, of intense work. And then you should be ready. So.
And kind of thinking about, so you had a piece of intention propositions within that too. How is that different from design principles?
So the design principles, design principles I've come across many versions of design principles. There are some that helps the organization stay on track. For example, Philips has caring, innovative, impactful, right? So these are some words that we have internally that drive us. And so these are big principles that are words or sentences. But how do you frame that from the perspective of a given project, right? And for a given project, what does caring mean when it comes to, say, designing a toothbrush or designing services around toothbrushes, right? To give you an example. So those are things that the team needs to figure out. And these kind of worksheets help you frame them. Where are we not being caring? And then where can we introduce a new way of doing so, and so on.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to go to the topic of liminality. Actually, it was really cool to see it brought up, because I definitely think it doesn't get talked about enough. It's kind of the gap. It's the couch cushions of, I think, journey maps. Let's talk a little bit. Let's explore a little bit more about that. I mean, what is it about liminality that is so critical, and why are we not paying attention to it? I think that kind of goes on from both your perspectives, again, from that touch point perspective to that more holistic space.
I'll just say it briefly. Vijay is cool because I like your whole industrial product, like the design side of it coming in from this way. I think it's really, really cool. So I definitely want to hear what you have to say about it. I'll just say briefly that for me, the light bulb that went off with liminality was realizing that there were so many different kinds of experiences that had the same kinds of sort of gaps, right? Or sort of like, sort of hidden spots. Whether it was a more, sort of more more like real life experience in a service, or something more like policy related, sort of my day-to-day life work wise, or in interaction design, sort of like, and it recurred to me that just nobody owns these experiences. I think it gets ignored because we're just all overworked, and it's just, not enough people to do all the things. And so it's really easy to miss stuff. Also, I think it based on your own experiences, right? Like it's how you see the world, how you interact in the world, how you live in the world, where you came from, maybe your upbringing. Like I think a lot of that stuff really helps you to be able to see the cracks and fissures that other folks can't see, because you're just used to seeing certain kinds of things. And I won't even delve into that too much, but you all can kind of pick up the threads there a little bit. But I want to hear what Vijay has to say about this.
Yeah, I think to me, the key thing about a journey map that's interesting is that we are trying to map actions over time, right? So it's actions over time. It sounds very simple, and it can be made simple, But if you think about it, in a given moment, so much can happen. So much can happen. So much can happen inside the head. So much can happen with all the touch points. You know, we are always walking through a space. You're always walking through, holding a product. Even if you're using an app, you're holding a phone. You're wearing clothes. So many things are happening that, you know, how much do you want to consider, and how like, it can be very complex if you actually take photographs of a certain journey and put it in a visual format. So sometimes it gets easier to do a video. But how do we go back to freeze frame a certain moment and say, hey, this is what's going wrong. This is where we need to intervene. You know, I know there are these beautiful thoughts about choosing those key moments and then intervening and all of that. But those are, again, at this point, things that it's still opinion based, right? It's still a couple of us decide that, okay, this is a key moment because maybe it impacts business or so on. And then we go and try to solve those moments. But the rest of them, you know, how much of time do you want to really control, and how, the experience over time is, I think it's a big challenge. And I don't know, maybe someday we'll have a supercomputer that'll watch all of that and we'll be able to program some of that, but and then that'll lead to other unintended consequences. But anyway, who knows? So, but it's definitely a complex topic.
Do you think any of it is ever without consequence? Do you think unintended consequences are unavoidable at any level?
Yeah, but we should work to mitigate those. We just can't use it as an excuse. Oh, I just didn't know. Well, somebody died. Thanks. You know, like, or now, great, I can't get health insurance, or, oh, great, I can't get to this thing I need. Like, I mean, obviously, if it's something benign, right? Like, it's just some video game or something. All right, well, it'll be a big deal. But often it's much more significant, right? And so we need to, it's like whack-a-mole, at the thing we're just hitting the thing constantly, using the hammer to hit the little things that pop up. We need to be doing more of that, so that, because they're going to keep popping up, but we don't get to just be like, well.
Yeah,
absolutely. And there's so much that we already know that we shouldn't do. And I think if we apply all of that, that would already be a big step. And then we'll discover more.
Yeah. Well, so my final wrapping question, let's see, how do I frame this? So I'm really big on positive psychology and kind of how can we go extreme in that direction, and what does that look like in design? And this tends to play out more often in like experience design. When we look at, experience as a service, you get these emotional triggers that then allow something to resonate or allow you to remember the experience a little bit better. And so I'm really interested in that intersection between a day-to-day design where you're not designing for Disneyland. It might be, a very functional experience, but how can you create those moments of joy? So very much the opposite extreme of these negative unintended consequences. So I will ask you, do you have any examples where you've had maybe an unintended consequence, but it's been on the extreme joy side, something that you didn't expect, something that was, a result of a touch point where, whether or not it was intentional on the part of the business or the design, it did something, it created that positive shift.
Yeah, all the time. But I think it's more in like actual experiences, in real life, when you think of humans who do things, a person who goes the extra mile to do a thing, or something got lost. I can think of several examples. The best example, I tweeted this like a year ago, something. I was going to Finland. I was waiting to go to Finland. And so, but anyway, there were some folks who were supposed to fly to, I don't know, Switzerland or something. And they announced it over the loudspeaker, but it's so loud in this airport, it's in Seattle, nobody could hear anything. So this individual, person working in the gate went to every person in our whole area and walked through and said, "Are you going to Switzerland? Are you going to Geneva? Are you going to Geneva?" He did this for 5 minutes to make sure nobody got left behind. That was cool. And I wasn't even going to Geneva, but I just thought, how neat is that? That, he didn't have to do that. Didn't lose his job if he didn't do that. But that's really cool. And you're not going to map that, right? And you wouldn't be scalable to do that all the time. Well, you could map it, but you wouldn't be able to scale that to do that all the time. You could, but you wouldn't be
Yeah.
able to scale every individual doing that every time, right?
Yeah, for me, I guess I do have more of a personal thing. Parenting, for example, one of the things, I have a 3-year-old, and I'm discovering, the attitudes towards parenting have changed a lot, and more we are realizing that punishment and giving, a blank stare doesn't just cut it, right? So sometimes you encourage people to do something else, and that works so much better, or replace a behavior that's destructive with something that's constructive. And so those are things I think work universally, right? We think kids are kids and adults are different humans, but no, I mean, in the end, all of us love. I think if ever we want some change to happen, it's easier to encourage somebody to change rather than punish somebody to change, right? As a first step. After the fact, that's a different matter. Law, I won't get into that part, but but when it comes to, let's say, for normal people who are not having extreme actions and you want to make them do something different, encouragement always helps.
Yeah. Yeah, those are good examples. I do think it's important to keep those. And I'll share mine. This was a hijacked experience. I mean, these are, few and far between, because I think it's easier to look at the negatives, but I hijacked an experience where I created an unintended consequence for somebody else. And I'm really proud of it. And I tell the story because I want everyone to do this. I had a family member who was taking a medical licensing exam, and those are just notoriously, if anyone's ever worked in medicine or knows anyone who has, it's kind of, it takes over your life and it's a whole thing. But that moment of when you receive the results, that's a very pivotal moment. You're either crying at your mailbox because you got a letter saying, you can't get this thing that enables you to do your job, essentially, or you're smiling at the mailbox and there's no one to hug, and that's kind of a little bit sadder. And so I hijacked that for a family member and was able to find a back end into the nursing system to figure out if she passed or not, and it was accurate. And so I found out before she got the letter. And then I did a big reveal. I was able to plan an experience around her. And honestly, this was the greatest moment of my life, not just hers, because it just was so unacceptable, right? That this is part of the experience. No one's ever going to fix that. But I do think that when we have these dialogues, I think kind of bringing back to this idea of what kind of power and ability do we have, either as designers when this is within the scope of our work, or as designers, as humans, as we notice things in the world around us. I feel like we have to exercise our ability to create these moments, because to me, that's the real tipping point. It's kind of like a pyramid scheme of goodness, that's the ripple effect that's going to happen. So for what it's worth, I encourage creating your own positive unintended consequences. And with that, we will wrap this Q&A. Thank you so much to Ron and Vijay. This is such an important combination of topics.